Hi there, I'm Andrea Koppel, and it's Time for Coffee, the podcast where you get to hear firsthand what the jobs and careers that interest you the most are really like.
Hey there, Java junkies. Thanks so much for clicking play. I'm curious, though, is this your first episode of Time for Coffee, or are you binging? Tweet me at time4coffee, LLC, and let me know. I would also, of course, love to hear what you think of Time for Coffee and what professions you want me to be featuring in the coming weeks. In the meantime, grab your mug and get ready to chug some caffeinated beverage, because it's time for another caffeinated career conversation. My guest today is someone you are going to learn a lot from. And I know that because when I met Elise, Gaston in July at Podcast Movement, the huge gathering of podcasters from around the world, and she and I spoke, I realized there are so many reasons that I wanted you to get to hear from her. Firstly, because until recently, she was a human resources executive who had worked for some of the biggest, best-known companies in the U.S., from Starbucks Coffee to Yum Brands to the United Healthcare Corporation. But the other reason I wanted to interview Elise is that she is also the host of a podcast, a fantastic one, I should say, called Because of Horses, which, among other things, helps people explore the incredible variety of careers that exist within the horse world. And she's going to help our horse-crazy Java junkies better understand how they can break into the horse industry. And I should also let you know that Elise is a many times over published author and a former journalist. In other words, she has a whole lot of wisdom and expertise to share. So with that, Elise, welcome to Time for Coffee.
Thanks so much. And thank you for that wonderful introduction. I'm sitting here going, wow, who's she talking about? Oh, wait, that's me. And I should tell you, I have my own caffeinated beverage here. My beverage of choice is, of course, Starbucks double shot espresso.
Are you caffeinated and ready to go? Your answer is
always yes.
Fantastic. Well, Elise, let's get into the espresso shots. What entry-level jobs are available to our Java junkies who are interested in both, let's say, or either human resources or the horse industry, or both?
Oh, golly. Well, okay, so let's start with the HR side, human resources. So the best and really the primary way to get into human resources in the current market is going to be with a more administrative role. So a human resources assistant would be one title that you would see job descriptions and postings for. If there are folks who are more oriented toward the mathematical side, the compensation world is a very hot world in human resources right now, to the degree where there are a ton of compensation, we call it comp, out there that are available, and there just aren't qualified people for those roles. So they are paying top dollar and recruiting very aggressively and with some wonderful sign-on packages, even for the lower level roles when you're talking about kind of the associate level. So typically in HR, you'll see assistant, associate. On the generalist side, you'll see the title of generalist and the normal kind of corporate career structure. But in those entry-level roles, those are the titles that you typically look for. There also are specialized roles in benefits. Payroll is kind of an offshoot of HR, just depending upon the organization. Certainly understanding how payroll works is beneficial to everybody who gets a paycheck. So,
yes.
Especially if you want a career in it. Yeah, so that's sort of the HR side. On the horse world side, it's a real head-scratcher. So traditionally, you would look at roles like a groom, or the stories of horse people, typically horse crazy girls who would clean stalls, hot walk, so walk hot horses until they cooled off. It's called hot walking. Really all of the grungy, awful jobs that nobody really wants to do around a barn, horse crazy girls and boys would do just for the privilege to be around horses and maybe to be given the opportunity to ride from time to time. So that's kind of how you get your foot in the door into a barn. But from a career perspective, it's not really going to help you. So there are some wonderful organizations out there today that didn't exist back when I was hoping for a job in the horse world. One of them is called the Kentucky Equine Management Internship Program, KEMI for short, KEMI. And they're based in Kentucky, shocking, but it's an international internship and it's paid, and it pays really well. It's wonderfully organized. There is a classroom component and there's a hands-on component where the interns are actually assigned to thoroughbred horse racing farm. And it's anything from the foaling farms where they have the babies and the mares, all the way to the stallion farms, which is typically where you see the big name racehorses stabled, and they're taking care of mares, so to speak, as they come in and visit. And then you'll see the training farms where they've got the younger horses who are in and out. But these interns actually live on the farm for a period of time and they work. And so that component of it is a 24/7 job, and it's really hard work. But my goodness, do you learn? And when you come out of that, the hands-on experience that you have, the contacts, the networking opportunities, it's phenomenal. And virtually all of those internships turn into top-notch jobs when the internship program is completed, and they're provided with living arrangements that are actually quite nice.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so that's the first one that comes to mind.
Great. So, Elise, what is a useful skill or skills that you've looked for over the years in the people that you hired?
I have always been focused on, this is going to sound a little cheesy, I apologize, but I've always focused on attitude. So in HR, we think of performance under kind of two categories. There's skill and there's will. Skill, I can teach all day. I can teach the ins and outs of employment law. I can teach organizational structures and organizational effectiveness, all of that. But if the person doesn't have motivation and energy and interest and doesn't take pride in the work that he or she does, then they could be the most qualified individual on the face of the planet, but it's just not going to happen, right? They're too hard to work with, and you can't really trust that the work that they're doing is going to be there. Conversely, if they come with the motivation and the energy and the drive and they care about what they're doing, it's that X factor that's really hard to quantify, but you feel it when you're interviewing them, and the answers that they give, even if they've never had any experience, I am way more likely to hire someone like that into one of my lower level roles than I am someone who has the experience, but just sort of sits there passively and doesn't engage in the interview, doesn't ask me questions about, so what's the team like? What's the job like? What do you look for? What's a day-to-day experience like? None of that. If they're just sort of sitting there waiting for the questions to be asked, I'm not as impressed as knowing that they've researched the role, they've researched the company, they know a little bit, maybe even about where I've worked, because I'm all over LinkedIn. I know when I'm interviewing for a job, one of the first things I do is figure out who I'm going to talk to. And then I go out on LinkedIn and I look at their profiles and I see, do I know anybody that this person knows? Could I give them a call and chat about this person I'm going to be interviewing with next week? Because it tells me two things. First, it tells me how to most effectively engage with them. But second, it also tells me whether or not this is somebody I want to work with. Because when you think about it, you tend to spend more time working with the people where you're employed than you actually do with your own family and friends. And so if you don't like them, if they're unpleasant to be around, then you really need to factor that into your decision as to whether or not that's a job you want. Because just as they're interviewing you, the candidate should also be interviewing the company and everybody that they talk to.
That is such a great point, Elise. And I don't think it's something that I really internalized until quite a bit later in my career, that it really needed to be a two-way street. So fantastic. I'm so glad you flagged that. Now, I know that when you were an undergrad at Randolph-Macon Women's College, you studied sociology and communications with a minor in journalism. But do you think that someone's major is a deciding factor or even important in terms of their breaking into either the field of human resources or the horse industry?
I tend to think not. So on the HR side, I tend to look at college, and I'm both the mother of a 16-year-old who's looking at college now, but also professional who's hired and mentored a lot of people. And I tend to look at college really as an opportunity for the student to expand their horizons and to explore subjects that catch their fancy and really help them to think and to be well-rounded people with a great foundation that's based upon a love of learning, a desire to know, and intellectual curiosity. I think that really is the key. Now, that said, there are, those individuals who just somehow know as young kids what it is they want to do with their lives. God love them. That's awesome. But I'll tell you, they're by far in the minority. And I think a lot of high school students put themselves through undue stress thinking that they've got to figure it all out. I'm 53 and I've had 3 different careers and I've loved every one of them. And I'm not doing what I thought I would do when I was in high school. So the path that you follow can be exciting and rewarding and wonderful, but you got to keep your focus broad. And then as you follow these different paths and you find those subjects that really intrigue you and engage you, then narrow your focus a little bit more. And maybe that narrowing focus is grad school. Maybe that narrowing of focus is you graduate from college and you go out and you try a lower level position in the industry that you think you'll be interested in, or the field that you think you'll be interested in. Marketing looks like a whole lot of fun until you get a job in a high pressure marketing firm. And then it's a different experience entirely. You won't know that until you actually experience it. I think that internships, therefore, are a whole lot more important than the subjects necessarily that you study or the majors that you graduate with when you're in college, because they offer that wonderful foundation of broad knowledge. They give you hands-on experience. And just like when you're interviewing for a job and you're interviewing the company as a candidate, as a college student, or a young person in general, as you're taking those internships, you're exploring, you're engaging, you're asking yourself on a day-to-day basis, is this something I want to do with my life? Or maybe it's not quite what I thought it was. But in that role, you also have an opportunity to explore other avenues that might be different than the one that you originally thought was the one that you would follow. Now, from a horse perspective, it's a little bit different because you really do have to have the know-how to care for these immense animals that actually are quite fragile. And no horseman, especially at the high levels, is going to allow someone who has no experience at all to get around their horses and to handle them. First off, because that person could be killed, frankly. But second, because your horse could be injured, somebody else could be injured, whatever. So somewhere on the horse side, people have to gain that experience to get the hands-on side of working with horses. Now, the differential here is, as you were alluding in the introduction, there are a million different jobs in the horse industry where you'll never touch a horse. But maybe you love horses and you love photography, so you photograph horses. Or maybe you love horses and design, so you design riding apparel. I mean, you can take in a million different paths and still be in the horse world and never have to clean a stall. There are a lot of different ways to think about it. Alone, the horse industry in 2017 accounted for $122 billion to the U.S. economy. That's a lot of people and a lot of options, too.
That's fantastic. That was something that got me super excited about this interview when you and I were talking in Philly, was just the fact that you can go in so many different directions. I wish I had known that when I was starting out. Elise, what kind of life experiences do you think are most useful for someone either starting out in human resources or in the horse industry?
People come from every walk of life and every culture around the globe into both industries. And on the horse side, I have especially loved that because it's always struck me that people who love horses regardless of the culture they come from, the language that they speak. And that to me is just phenomenal. On the HR side, I think the broader experience that you have, the better. HR people have to be able to interact with a wide variety of folks very effectively and appropriately. And so where in a lot of careers, you have the ability to outwardly express it when you have a bad day, or when you're worried about something, you have that ability to just come in and kind of zone out a little bit and not fully engage with folks. Well, if you're in human resources, especially if you're at a higher level, everybody around you who's not in HR gauges in many ways the health of the organization, what's going on in the company, whether their jobs are at risk, if something's going to be sold off or closed. They gauge the temperature of the company and their own job security by their observations of the HR people. So you don't have the luxury of being cross or tired or having a bad day or just not really feeling like interacting with people. Because if you do, the thought is going to occur to at least some people, oh, great, she's not talking to me. Does that mean that I'm about to get laid off? You just can't do that. The other thing that's equally important in human resources is discretion. If you're investigating something that's blown up in IT and you regularly go out to lunch with somebody in that group and then some folks ultimately lose their job or somebody gets written up. Oh, okay. So it happened with this one. They got laid off, but not those others that you have lunch with all the time. Working in HR can be incredibly lonely, and you have to be really, really discreet in where you spend your time, how much time you spend with people, and who you chat with and the subjects that you chat about, because you always must remain above and outside that day-to-day office politics, office conversations stuff. If you're going to be in HR, that's what's going to happen.
Gosh, I had never really thought about that. That's got to be tough. Elise, what is the best part for you when you were in the human resources industry?
Really, there are two aspects. So, a lot of people will say and answer the question, why'd you get in HR? Oh, I love people. Oh my gosh, never say that to an HR person because it just drives us crazy. Sure, it's a great characteristic, but that's not the reason to get into HR. You do it because you love fixing problems, because you love taking complexity and making sense of it, and because you like all the moving pieces and the variety that brings to your day-to-day experience. And that really, I think, is what draws the greatest number of people into human resources. At the end of the day, we all enjoy taking complex problems and simplifying them and making it easier for people to understand and to be more productive and to enjoy their jobs a bit more and for the company to be successful. Those are all the rewards of that side of it.
And what about the downside of it? What was the part of that job that was really hard?
There were a couple of aspects, I guess. So, we talked about the loneliness side of it. You get used to that pretty quickly. And I think probably the downside of it is the same issues just keep cropping up over and over again. You keep doing the same thing thinking you're going to get a different outcome. So, yeah, that's probably the downside.
Elise, what is the best career advice you've ever gotten?
I don't know that I was ever given the advice, but the recognition that paychecks are important and being self-sufficient is important. Being able to pay for that roof over your head and a decent standard of living and not living fearfully from paycheck to paycheck. All of those things are wonderful and they're positive and they are all great aspirations. But the end of all of that, we really do only have one life to live, and to allow ourselves, and I've done it repeatedly, and in the not too distant past, where I have lost sight of that and have been caught up in very stressful situation at work and all the swirl and just trying to get it right instead of stepping back and going, hang on, from a lifelong perspective, what is this doing to me and my life and the quality of my life, so that if I got run over by a Mack truck tomorrow, what am I feeling in this moment? And if it's not okay, then maybe it's time to find something else somewhere else. And that can be in a different industry. It can be just simply a different company. And so really long-winded way of saying it is to be your own best friend, your own best advocate. If I were my best friend, I would be stepping in and saying, it's time to make a change. So what do I need to do to feel better?
Yep, that is such great advice. Elise, what movies or television shows or anything in popular culture do you think accurately depict human resources?
Oh my gosh, this is a tough one. Probably the closest would be the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie. The reason for that is just simply it's this group of very different, often oppositional people who really don't like each other very much. And they figure out how to work together while respecting those differences that initially they hated. And then there's a really cool dance off at the end. So,
Elise, final espresso shot. What would Java junkies be surprised to learn about the field of human resources?
I think probably it goes back to that. Why do people get into HR? Well, you get into HR because you like people, and that HR folks hate hearing that from people who are trying to get into HR. It's a good quality. I mean, you don't want somebody in HR, really in any job, who hates people, but you also don't want them, I'm going to age myself here, like the Love Boat and Julie, the cruise director, right? You don't want them to be chirpy and I love people, because then you're a people pleaser and you're going to do everything that people want to keep them happy. And that's not it at all. Really, it's not about liking people. That's not the foundation of it. The foundation of it genuinely is taking complex problems and making sense of them.
Elise, thank you so much for making time for coffee with me and the Java Junkie community today. I so enjoyed getting to hear your sage advice.
Well, thank you. This has been so much fun.
Thanks so much for listening to Time for Coffee, where the professionals in the jobs that most interest you always have time to grab coffee 24/7, no matter where you live. I have one quick favor to ask you. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to Time for Coffee. Thanks so much.